That's how my husband Derek described me to his colleagues at the company holiday party. His words sliced through the festive atmosphere as he raised his glass of expensive bourbon, drawing laughs from the circle of executives surrounding him. I maintained my practiced smile, the one I'd perfected over 7 years of marriage, while my fingers tightened around my champagne flute. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Little did Derek know that in less than 3 weeks, the tech startup I'd been secretly building for the past 5 years would acquire the failing division of Meridian Technologies he managed, and my first executive decision would be to eliminate his position entirely. The Meridian Technologies Holiday Gala was in full swing at the Grand Pinnacle Hotel in downtown Boston. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the ballroom, where executives and their spouses mingled among ice sculptures and elaborate floral arrangements. A jazz quartet played softly in the corner while waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I stood beside Derek, wearing the burgundy cocktail dress he'd selected for me that morning. "Something appropriate for a VP's wife," he'd said, barely glancing at me as he adjusted his custom-tailored suit. Derek Sullivan, Vice President of Product Development at Meridian Technologies, the company's rising star according to the industry press. Tall, conventionally handsome, with a calculated charm he could deploy at will. The man I'd once fallen in love with before I understood the bargain I was making. "Melissa, honey, grab me another drink, would you?" Derek pushed his empty glass into my hand without looking away from Philip Garrison, Meridian's CEO. I slipped away toward the bar, grateful for the momentary escape. "Make it a double, Sean," I said to the bartender, who greeted me with a genuine smile, unlike the practiced ones being exchanged throughout the room. "Rough night, Mrs. Sullivan?" Sean asked, reaching for the top-shelf bourbon. "Just the usual?" "Corporate pageantry," I replied. "And please, it's Melissa." As Sean prepared Derek's drink, I scanned the room, noting the power dynamics at play. Meridian Technologies had been struggling for the past 18 months, something Derek complained about nightly but never took responsibility for. Their legacy hardware division was hemorrhaging money, and their attempts to pivot to cloud services had been clumsy at best. What Derek didn't know, what none of them knew, was how intimately familiar I was with Meridian's weaknesses. My company, Phoenix Digital Solutions, had been analyzing their vulnerabilities for months, preparing for the acquisition I'd set in motion last week. An acquisition that would be announced on January 15th, shortly after Meridian's board meeting. "Here you go," Sean said, sliding the bourbon across the bar. "Don't work too hard tonight." If only he knew. I made my way back to Derek, who had moved to a larger circle now including several board members and their spouses. I handed him the drink, which he accepted without acknowledgement, continuing his animated description of the project launch his team had salvaged last quarter. "Complete disaster until I stepped in," Derek was saying, his voice carrying that practiced authority he'd perfected. "The development team had no direction. Marketing was clueless about positioning. Typical problems when you have too many people who don't understand the big picture." Richard Winters, one of the board members, nodded sympathetically. "Finding competent people is the greatest challenge in this industry." "Tell me about it," Derek laughed, taking a sip of his bourbon. "It's why I keep such tight control on my division. You can't expect average minds to grasp the complexities of what we're building." I bit my tongue, thinking of the innovative architecture my development team at Phoenix had created. The same system that would soon replace Meridian's outdated infrastructure. "What about you, Melissa?" Jennifer Winters, Richard's wife, turned to me with polite interest. "Derek says you used to work in tech before you got married." Before Derek could intercept, I smiled. "Yes, I was in software development at Rivera Systems." Melissa was a junior programmer, Derek clarified quickly, placing a hand on my lower back that felt more like a warning than affection. "She helped with some basic QA work before we started our family. The fact that we had no children A deliberate choice I'd made while building my company didn't seem to register with him. In Derek's narrative, I had happily abandoned my career to support his, a sacrifice he had invented and embellished over the years. It was a bit more than QA, actually, I corrected gently. I led the development team for their first mobile payment system. Derek's hand pressed more firmly against my back. Honey, you're being modest. You were part of the team, but let's not exaggerate. Rivera's payment system was pretty rudimentary. A rudimentary system that had processed over $3 billion in transactions before Rivera was acquired by a multinational corporation. A system I had architected from concept to deployment. What do you do with your time now, Melissa? Jennifer pressed, seemingly genuinely interested. Oh, Melissa keeps busy, Derek interjected before I could answer. She serves on the community garden committee and has her book club. Plus, she maintains our home beautifully. I couldn't do what I do without her handling all that domestic stuff. Right, honey? I took a sip of champagne to hide my expression. The community garden committee was actually my cover for board meetings at Phoenix. The book club consisted of strategy sessions with my executive team, and our home was maintained by a cleaning service I paid for from my separate accounts. Accounts Derek knew nothing about. That's right, I said, meeting his eyes with a smile that didn't reach my... Oh no, someone has to handle the domestic stuff. Richard Winters chuckled, raising his glass. Behind every successful man, right? Absolutely, Derek agreed, his arm now draped possessively around my shoulders. Melissa understands her role perfectly. You know, just last week I was telling my team, the best thing a smart man can do is marry a woman who knows her place. Something cold settled in my chest. This wasn't just the usual dismissiveness. This was Derek at his most condescending, performing for his colleagues at my expense. And what place is that, Derek? I asked, my voice pleasant but with an edge that made Jennifer Winters raise her eyebrows slightly. Derek laughed, pulling me closer in what would appear to onlookers as an affectionate gesture. Don't be difficult, Melissa, he murmured near my ear, his breath hot with bourbon. Then, louder. The place that makes everyone's lives run smoothly. The support system. The heart of the home. Just a housewife, I supplied, looking directly at him now. Is that what you mean? Well, I wouldn't put it so bluntly. Derek backpedaled slightly, aware of the watching eyes. But essentially, yes. And you're excellent at it. The circle of executives chuckled indulgently. Several of the wives exchanged looks I couldn't quite interpret, sympathy perhaps, or recognition of a familiar dynamic. A toast, Derek announced, raising his glass higher. To the partners who make our success possible by taking care of the small things so we can focus on the big picture. To my Melissa, the perfect example of knowing what really matters in life. As glasses clinked around me, I maintained my smile. But inside, my resolve hardened. I'd been wavering about the timing of Derek's termination after the acquisition. Now, the decision crystallized with perfect clarity. There would be no transition, period. No opportunity for him to salvage his position. When Phoenix acquired Meridian's division, Derek Sullivan would be the first to go. If you'll excuse me, I said, slipping away from Derek's grasp. I need to visit the ladies' room. In the elegant marble bathroom, I leaned against the counter, finally allowing my carefully constructed expression to fall. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my COO, Alex. Move up the timeline. I want everything ready for announcement by January 12th instead of 15th. Board documentation prepared by Tuesday. The response came almost immediately. Any particular reason for the rush? I stared at my reflection in the mirror, seeing past the makeup and styled hair to the woman beneath. The CEO of a rising tech company, the architect of innovations Derek had dismissed as basic, the strategist who had identified Meridian's vulnerable division as the perfect acquisition target months ago. Just ready to stop pretending, I typed back. I slipped my phone into my clutch and reapplied my lipstick, the deep burgundy matching my dress. 7 years of playing the supportive wife, of hiding my ambitions and achievements, of listening to Derek minimize my intelligence and capabilities. 7 years of building something he couldn't begin to comprehend while he boasted about knowing the big picture. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek had no idea how limited his vision truly was. As I prepared to return to the party, the bathroom door opened and Jennifer Winters entered. She hesitated when she saw me, then moved to the adjacent sink. "Your husband certainly has a way with words," she remarked, opening her purse to retrieve her makeup. "Derek has always been skilled at crafting narratives," I replied carefully. "A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off." Jennifer applied a fresh coat of lipstick before turning to face me fully. "You know, Richard used to introduce me as his former secretary at these functions. It wasn't untrue. I was his secretary when we met. What he conveniently left out was that I was also finishing my MBA at night and had already launched a consulting firm on the side." I raised an eyebrow, reassessing the woman before me. "And now?" "Now my consulting firm generates 3 times the revenue of his division at Meridian," she said with a small smile. "But at these functions, I'm still just Richard's wife." "Why maintain the facade?" I asked, genuinely curious. Jennifer shrugged elegantly. "Strategic advantage. People reveal more when they think you're harmless. Richard understands this. It's actually a game we play together now." She studied me for a moment. "But I get the sense your situation is different." I considered how to respond, weighing the risk against the potential ally. "Let's just say Derek doesn't share your husband's enlightened perspective." I gathered that. Jennifer closed her purse with a decisive snap. "Well, if you ever want to have coffee with someone who understands the complexities of being underestimated, I'd be happy to share some war stories." She offered me a business card that I accepted with genuine appreciation. Perhaps here was an unexpected alliance in the making, one that could prove useful in the coming weeks. "I may take you up on that sooner than you might expect," I said, tucking the card into my clutch. Jennifer gave me a knowing look. "I look forward to it." When we returned to the party, Derek was in animated conversation with Philip Garrison, gesticulating emphatically about something. I caught fragments of their discussion as I approached. Derek was making bold promises about the division's performance in the coming quarter, promises I knew he couldn't keep given the fundamental flaws in their technical architecture. "Ah, there you are," Derek said as I rejoined them. "Philip was just saying how impressed he is with the roadmap I've laid out for Q1. "Ambitious but achievable," Philip agreed, though the tight lines around his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Derek believes we can increase market share by 15% with the new feature set." I knew from my company's analysis of Meridian's infrastructure that their system couldn't support the features Derek was proposing without a complete back-end overhaul, precisely what Phoenix would implement after the acquisition, but not something Derek's team could execute in their current state. "That sounds impressive," I said neutrally. "What innovations are you planning to drive that growth?" Derek shot me a warning look, clearly annoyed by my specific question. "Technical details aren't really dinner conversation, honey. Philip and I are discussing high-level strategy." "Of course," I demurred, playing my assigned role once more. "I wouldn't understand the complexities anyway." Philip, perhaps sensing the tension, excused himself to speak with other guests, leaving Derek and me momentarily alone. "What are you doing?" Derek hissed under his breath. "You know I hate when you ask technical questions in front of my colleagues." "I was showing interest in your work," I replied evenly. "Isn't that what a supportive wife should do?" "Not by challenging me on specifics you don't understand," he said, his smile fixed for anyone who might be watching us. It undermines my authority. 7. Years ago, this exchange would have ended with my apology, my retreat to maintain peace. Tonight, with Phoenix's acquisition documents already being prepared, with Jennifer Winter's business card in my purse, with the weight of Derek's "just a housewife" comment still hanging in the air, I felt something shift irrevocably. Perhaps, "Your authority is more fragile than I realized," I said softly. Derek's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, the event coordinator announced that dinner would be served. He gripped my elbow, steering me toward our assigned table near the front of the room. "We'll discuss this at home," he muttered, his voice carrying that familiar note of finality that had once intimidated me. "Yes," I agreed, thinking of the documents, waiting in my home office, hidden behind the innocuous household budget folders on my personal laptop. Documents outlining Phoenix Digital's complete restructuring plan for Meridian's acquired division, including the elimination of redundant leadership positions. "We certainly will." As we took our seats at the table with other Meridian executives, I felt a strange sense of calm descend. For years, I had maintained the separation between my two lives. Melissa Sullivan, doting wife and just a housewife, and Melissa Reeves, my maiden name and professional identity, founder and CEO of Phoenix Digital Solutions. In 3 weeks, those identities would collide spectacularly. I glanced at Derek, confidently holding court at our table, entirely unaware that his professional fate had already been decided by the woman he'd just publicly reduced to a domestic accessory. The irony would be delicious, if it weren't so bitter. The drive home from the Meridian Technologies holiday party was silent. Derek loosened his tie as he drove, his jaw set in that familiar way that signaled his displeasure. I gazed out the passenger window at Boston's illuminated skyline, my mind already calculating the steps ahead. "You embarrassed me tonight," Derek finally said as we pulled into the driveway of our Brookline Colonial. The house, with its pristine landscaping and tasteful exterior, was yet another prop in the carefully constructed image Derek maintained. "Asked a question about your work," I replied evenly. "Hardly embarrassing." "It's not your place to question my strategic decisions in front of the CEO," he snapped, killing the engine. "You know nothing about the technical challenges we're facing." The irony of his statement almost made me laugh. If he only knew that I had spent the past 3 months analyzing the precise technical debt that was crippling Meridian systems, the outdated middleware, the scaling limitations, the security vulnerabilities that his team had consistently overlooked. "Of course," I murmured instead. "How foolish of me." Derek sighed dramatically as we entered the house, tossing his keys into the ceramic bowl on the entryway table. "I don't ask for much, Melissa. Just basic support at company functions." "Is that really so difficult?" "Not at all," I said, removing my coat. "I'll be more careful next time." He seemed satisfied with my apparent acquiescence, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Good. I'm going to have a nightcap in my study. Don't wait up." As Derek disappeared down the hallway, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, carefully removing the expensive jewelry he insisted I wear to these events. Jewelry he believed he had provided, but which I had actually purchased with my own funds. I changed out of the burgundy dress, hanging it precisely in the closet where he would expect to find it. Then, when I heard the familiar sounds of Derek pouring himself another bourbon and settling into his leather chair, I slipped into what he dismissively called my hobby room, a small space adjacent to our bedroom, where I supposedly pursued my crafting interests. I locked the door behind me and pressed my palm against the hidden biometric scanner disguised as a decorative wall panel. A section of custom shelving silently slid aside, revealing my actual workspace. A high-end computer setup with 3 monitors, a secure server, and various specialized equipment. Derek had never once questioned how I afforded these crafting supplies, further evidence of how little attention he paid to my actual activities. I settled into my ergonomic chair and pulled up the secure messaging system that connected me. To Phoenix Digital's headquarters, status update on Meridian acquisition? I typed. Alex's response came quickly. Legal team has greenlit accelerated timeline. Board documents in preparation. Financial transfer mechanisms in place. We can move by January 12th as requested. Any concerns about Garrison's position? I asked, thinking of Meridian's CEO, who had seemed less confident than usual at tonight's event. Multiple confidential sources confirm he's actively seeking an exit before Q1 reports. He'll likely welcome our offer as his golden parachute. I smiled at that. Philip Garrison had built Meridian from the ground up, but in recent years had lost his innovative edge. The acquisition would give him a dignified exit while allowing Phoenix to absorb the valuable parts of Meridian's business. Everyone would win. Everyone except Derek. As I shut down the secure system and restored my hobby room to its innocent appearance, my mind drifted back 12 years to when I first met Derek Sullivan. Back then, I was truly Melissa Reeves, a senior developer at Rivera Systems, working on what would become their revolutionary mobile payment architecture. Derek had joined the company as a product manager, charismatic, ambitious, and initially impressed by my technical abilities. I've never met a woman who codes like you do, he had said on our third date, a statement I foolishly took as a compliment rather than the red flag it was. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Derek was attentive, seemingly supportive of my career, and genuinely interested in my ideas. Or so I thought. What I didn't recognize at the time was how he subtly began taking credit for my concepts in meetings, presenting them as collaborations where he had provided the vision, and I had merely executed the technical details. The pattern continued after we married. Derek leveraged the success of Rivera's payment system, my payment system, to secure a senior position at Meridian Technologies. He encouraged me to leave Rivera, suggesting I take time to figure out what I really wanted to do while he established himself at Meridian. We don't need two tech careers in one household, he argued. It's inefficient. With my connections and your technical skills, we could be a power couple, but we need to be strategic about it. I agreed to take a sabbatical, partly because I was already formulating the idea that would become Phoenix Digital. I had identified critical gaps in enterprise security infrastructure that neither Rivera nor Meridian were addressing. I saw an opportunity to build something transformative, something that would require my full attention. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly Derek would rewrite our narrative once I stepped away from corporate visibility. Suddenly, I wasn't. A talented developer taking time to explore new opportunities. I was a woman who had chosen family over career, despite the fact that we had jointly decided not to have children. Melissa decided the corporate rat race wasn't for her, I overheard. Him telling a colleague 6 months after I left Rivera. She's much happier focusing on our home. Some women just aren't built for the pressure of tech development. I confronted him that night, hurt and bewildered by his revisionist history. That's not what happened at all, I said. I left Rivera to explore other opportunities, not to become a homemaker. Derek had looked genuinely confused. But you are taking care of our home, aren't you? You're not actually working right now. I was just simplifying the situation for colleagues who don't need our life story. By completely misrepresenting my choice, by making it sound like I couldn't handle professional pressures? You're overreacting, he said dismissively. It's just easier to explain it this way. Nobody cares about the nuances. And honestly, what are you really doing with your time right now? You've been talking about exploring opportunities for months without any concrete progress. What Derek didn't know, what I had deliberately kept from him after witnessing his casual appropriation of my work at Rivera, was that I had already incorporated Phoenix Digital Solutions, secured initial funding from angel investors impressed by my work at Rivera, and was in the process of patenting the security architecture that would become our flagship product. I made a decision that night, as Derek continued to explain why his version of events was essentially accurate. I would build Phoenix without his knowledge or involvement. I would maintain the facade he seemed so comfortable with, the supportive wife, the homemaker, the woman not built for pressure, while creating something that would ultimately eclipse his modest corporate achievements. It wasn't about revenge, at least not initially. It was about protection. I had seen how easily Derek absorbed others' accomplishments into his own narrative. I had witnessed his need to be the more successful partner, the provider, the one with the real career. Rather than challenge that directly, I chose to create a separate professional identity where his influence couldn't reach. 5 years later, as I slipped into bed beside an already sleeping Derek, the wisdom of that decision was evident. Phoenix Digital had grown from a small startup with innovative security solutions to a robust company with multiple enterprise products and over 200 employees. We had remained under the radar by focusing on specialized B2B markets, avoiding the kind of publicity that might have brought us to Derek's attention. Throughout those years, Derek's perception of me had calcified. In his mind, I was exactly what he had described at tonight's holiday party. Just a housewife, a former programmer who couldn't handle the demands of the tech industry, a woman who had found her proper place supporting his ambitions. The few times I had attempted to discuss my ongoing interest in technology, he had responded with patronizing indulgence. "It's cute that you still follow industry trends," he'd said once, when I mentioned concerns about a security vulnerability that would later become a major breach affecting several Fortune 500 companies, including Meridian. "But honey, things have evolved so much since you were doing basic QA work. The complexity of what we're dealing with now is on a completely different level." The vulnerability I had flagged eventually cost Meridian millions in emergency remediation and lost business. Derek had never connected my warning to the subsequent crisis, instead complaining for weeks about incompetent security vendors and impossible-to-predict exploits. Meanwhile, Phoenix's clients had been protected by our solution, which had anticipated and addressed the vulnerability months earlier. I turned on my side, away from Derek's sleeping form. In 10 days, the careful separation I had maintained between my two lives would collapse. Phoenix would acquire Meridian's struggling division. I would step forward as CEO Melissa Reeves, and Derek would find himself not only jobless but also married to the woman who had orchestrated his professional downfall. I should have felt triumph, or at least anticipation. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of resolve and regret, not for the acquisition, which was strategically sound, but for the years of deception that had brought us here. Necessary deception, perhaps, given Derek's nature, but deception nonetheless. Phone vibrated softly with a text message. I slipped out of bed to check it, careful not to wake Derek. It was from Jennifer Winters. "Enjoyed meeting you properly tonight. Coffee tomorrow at Westfield Cafe? 10 a.m.? I have some thoughts about Meridian you might find interesting." I hesitated, considering the implications. Jennifer was a board member's wife, but clearly had her own business intelligence. Meeting with her could provide valuable insights, or complications. "See you at 10, I replied, making the decision. The Westfield Cafe occupied a quiet corner in Boston's financial district, far enough from Meridian's offices that I wouldn't risk running into Derek or his colleagues. I arrived early, selecting a table in the back with a clear view of the entrance. Jennifer arrived precisely at 10, dressed in a casual but expensive ensemble that spoke of confident taste rather than trend following. She spotted me immediately and approached with a genuine smile. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, setting down a sleek leather portfolio before signaling the waiter. I suspected we might have more to discuss after our brief conversation last night. After placing our coffee orders, Jennifer leaned forward slightly. "I should clarify something right away. While Richard is on Meridian's board, our finances and business interests are entirely separate. Nothing we discuss here represents a conflict of interest for either of us." "I appreciate the clarification," I said, studying her carefully. Though I'm curious why you wanted to meet. Jennifer took a moment to organize her thoughts as our coffees arrived. Let's just say I recognized something in your eyes last night when Derek was giving his little toast. Something I've seen in the mirror, the look of a woman playing a long game. She opened her portfolio and slid a business article across the table. The headline read, Winters Consulting acquires major stake in data vision technologies. My company, she explained. The one Richard still introduces as my little consulting business at social functions, despite the fact that it generates revenue in the 9 figures annually. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely impressed. And he maintains that fiction because? It's useful to both of us, Jennifer said pragmatically. Richard gets to look like the traditional successful husband to his conservative board colleagues, and I get consistent access to information and connections that would be harder to obtain if everyone knew my actual position. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. But that's not the arrangement you have with Derek, is it? The direct question caught me off guard. After years of careful compartmentalization, the idea of openly discussing my true circumstances with a virtual stranger was both alarming and oddly liberating. No, I finally admitted. Derek believes exactly what he projects, that I'm a former programmer who couldn't hack it in the industry and now focuses on supporting his career. While you've been doing something else entirely, Jennifer suggested, her tone making it clear this wasn't a wild guess. I assessed my options quickly. Jennifer had shown her cards first, taking a calculated risk in revealing her own carefully maintained facade. Strategic trust might yield valuable information. I founded and run a technology company, I said, keeping my voice low despite the privacy of our table. Phoenix Digital Solutions. Jennifer's expression shifted from curiosity to genuine surprise, then appreciation. The security infrastructure company, the one that just developed the adaptive authentication system that's being integrated into federal systems? Now it was my turn to be surprised. You're well informed about specialized B2B security firms. She smiled. I make it my business to know which technologies are reshaping enterprise architecture. Phoenix has been on my radar for some time, though I had no idea about your connection to it. She paused, putting the pieces together. Melissa? Reeves, of course. You use your maiden name professionally. I nodded, feeling strangely exposed yet relieved. For obvious reasons. And Derek has no idea? None whatsoever. He believes I spend my days managing our household and serving on community committees. Jennifer sat back, assessment clear in her eyes. That must require extraordinary compartmentalization. It's been challenging, I acknowledged, particularly as Phoenix has grown. And now? She prompted, clearly sensing there was more to the story. I considered how much to reveal. Jennifer had no direct connection to Meridian beyond her husband's board position, which she'd already established was separated from her business interests. Still, caution was warranted. Now things are about to change, I said simply. Jennifer nodded slowly, connecting invisible dots. This wouldn't happen to relate to Meridian's struggling hardware division, would it? The one your husband manages? I kept my expression neutral. What makes you ask that? Because if I were in your position, with your company's capabilities, and Meridian's obvious vulnerabilities, it would be the logical move. She smiled. Also, Richard mentioned that an unnamed technology firm has been making discreet inquiries about that division's financials and technical architecture. The board is quietly shopping it to potential buyers before it drags down the entire company's valuation. This was valuable intelligence, confirmation that Meridian's board was already preparing for a sale, making our offer likely to be welcomed rather than resisted. If such an acquisition were hypothetically in progress, I said carefully, the timing might be rather delicate from a personal perspective. Jennifer understood immediately. Because it would reveal your professional identity to Derek at the same moment his position was eliminated. She winced slightly. That's quite the double blow. Hypothetically, I agreed. She considered this, tapping one manicured nail against her coffee cup. Have you considered an alternate approach? Revealing your professional identity to Derek before the acquisition becomes public? It might allow the personal revelation to be processed separately from the professional consequences. I had considered this option repeatedly over the past months, imagining various scenarios for telling Derek the truth. None had seemed viable. Derek doesn't respond well to discoveries that challenge his worldview, I explained. His first instinct would be to try to assert control over me, over the situation, possibly even over Phoenix itself. Jennifer nodded in understanding. Some men can't comprehend being outmaneuvered, especially by their partners. They experience it as a fundamental threat, exactly. If I told Derek now, he would likely try to leverage the information somehow, either to enhance his own position at Meridian or to interfere with Phoenix's acquisition plans. And after 7 years of deception, however justified, his wounded pride would be considerable, Jennifer added. Precisely, she sighed, a sound of feminine solidarity. So you're committed to the collision course. The acquisition proceeds, Derek loses his position, and simultaneously discovers his housewife is actually the CEO who orchestrated it all. When she laid it out so starkly, the magnitude of what I was setting in motion became freshly apparent. Not just a business acquisition, but the complete dismantling of the fiction my marriage had become. The business decision is sound, I said, as much to convince myself as Jennifer. Meridian's division has valuable IP and customer relationships, but their technical infrastructure is crumbling. Their leadership, including Derek, has consistently ignored fundamental problems while pursuing flashy but impractical features. Phoenix can stabilize the technology, retain the clients, and integrate the useful components. I don't doubt the business case, Jennifer said gently. I'm more concerned about the personal fallout. Have you considered what happens the day after? When will you both return to the same home after Derek has experienced this professional and personal earthquake? I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead, focusing instead on the mechanics of the acquisition and the logistics of the revelation. The actual aftermath, the human consequences, had remained a blurry area in my planning. I suppose I've been avoiding that part, I admitted. Jennifer reached across the table and briefly touched my hand, a surprising gesture of solidarity from someone who had been a stranger just hours earlier. Then perhaps that's what you should focus on now, she suggested. The business machinery is in motion. But how you handle the human element, that will determine whether this becomes merely a painful transition or a complete catastrophe. As I left the cafe 30 minutes later, Jennifer's words echoed in my mind. The business strategy was set. Phoenix would acquire Meridian's division. Derek would lose his position as part of the restructuring. These facts were fixed, but the revelation of my true identity, the confrontation that would inevitably follow, the aftermath of living with a man whose professional and personal narrative had been shattered by his wife. Those elements remained. Undefined, dangerous in their unpredictability. I checked my watch. Derek would be in meetings all day, believing me to be occupied with holiday shopping and preparations for a neighborhood committee gathering, another fiction that gave me freedom to manage Phoenix's operations. Instead, I directed my car toward Phoenix Digital's headquarters in Cambridge, where my executive team was waiting to finalize the acquisition strategy. I needed to ensure the business components were flawless before turning my attention to the approaching personal reckoning. As I drove across the Charles River, Boston's skyline gleaming in the winter sunlight, I thought about Derek's smug certainty at last night's party. Just a housewife, he had called me, secure in his position of superiority, confident in his assessment of my capabilities and worth. In 10 days, that certainty would be shattered forever. The question was whether anything could, or should, be salvaged from the wreckage. Phoenix Digital's headquarters occupied 3 floors of a renovated textile mill in Cambridge. The exposed brick and wooden beams contrasted with cutting-edge technology and modern design elements, a physical manifestation of our approach to business, respecting fundamental structures while innovating boldly. As I entered through the private executive entrance, a precaution against being spotted by anyone who might know me as Derek's wife, I felt the familiar sensation of shedding one identity and embracing another. Here, I was Melissa Reeves, founder and CEO, respected for my technical brilliance and strategic vision. No one questioned my authority or capabilities. No one knew me as just a housewife. The teams assembled in the main conference room. My executive assistant, Tyler, informed me as I stepped off the elevator. He handed me a tablet with the latest acquisition briefing documents. Alex added the updated projections from Financial this morning. Thank you, Tyler. Any urgent matters before I join them? Senator Wilder's office called again about the federal authentication contract. They'd like to schedule a follow-up presentation next week. And the CTO of Microspan reached out personally, requesting a meeting about potential integration partnerships. I quickly made decisions on both matters, adjusting my schedule to accommodate these high-priority opportunities. This was another stark contrast to my life with Derek, being the decision-maker rather than the support system, setting priorities rather than adapting to someone else's. As I approached the conference room, I pushed thoughts of Derek aside, focusing entirely on the business at hand. Through the glass walls, I could see my executive team engaged in animated discussion around the large oval table. These were among the industry's brightest minds, people I had personally recruited and who had chosen to join Phoenix because they believed in our vision. The conversation paused as I entered, and Alex Rodriguez, my COO and the first person I'd hired at Phoenix, rose to greet me. Perfect timing, he said. We were just debating the personnel transition strategy for the Meridian acquisition. I took my place at the head of the table, surveying the familiar faces of my leadership team. Alex, our operational mastermind. Diane Chen, our brilliant CTO. Marcus Washington, CFO with unparalleled financial modeling skills, and Sarah Patel, our head of legal and compliance. Each brought unique expertise to Phoenix, and each knew me only as the confident, decisive CEO I'd become. None of them had ever met Derek, though they knew I was married. I had carefully compartmentalized my personal and professional lives, keeping my husband entirely separate from Phoenix. Only Alex knew the full truth about my double life, and even he didn't know all the details of my relationship with Derek. Let's review where we stand, I began, tapping the table's surface to activate the integrated display. The acquisition timeline has been accelerated. We'll announce on January 12th, pending board approval on the 11th. Our focus today is finalizing the integration strategy for Meridian's team and technology. For the next hour, we dissected the acquisition plan component by component. Diane outlined the technical migration strategy, identifying which parts of Meridian's architecture could be salvaged and which needed complete replacement. Marcus presented the financial projections, showing ROI scenarios based on different integration timelines. Sarah walked us through the legal considerations, including employee transitions and intellectual property transfers. The current leadership structure at Meridian's division is top-heavy, Alex noted, pulling up an organizational chart. 5 VPs managing what should be handled by 2 and 3 layers of middle management creating bottlenecks in decision-making. I studied the chart, my eyes inevitably drawn to Derek's position. Vice President of Product Development, a role where his charisma and presentation skills had compensated for his limited technical understanding. In Phoenix's lean, expertise-driven structure, such a position wouldn't exist. Our analysis indicates we can retain approximately 75% of Meridian's technical staff, Alex continued. The other 25%, primarily in redundant management positions, would be offered standard severance packages. Including all current VPs? Diane asked, looking directly at me. This was the moment where my personal and professional lives threatened to collide, the decision about Derek's future with the company. Though I had already determined he would be let go, I needed to ensure the decision appeared entirely business-driven rather than personal. The product development leadership at Meridian has consistently misallocated resources, I said evenly. They've prioritized superficial features over infrastructure stability, resulting in the technical debt that's now crippling their system. None of the current VP-level managers have demonstrated the technical acumen or strategic vision we require. I paused, ensuring my voice revealed nothing of my personal connection. We'll evaluate each individual based on skills and performance metrics, but preliminary assessment suggests we'll want our own leadership team managing the integration. Diane nodded, satisfied with the logic. No one at the table questioned the decision. It aligned perfectly with Phoenix's established values and practices. Only Alex glanced at me with subtle concern, aware of the personal implications beneath the business reasoning. The meeting continued with detailed discussions of client retention strategies, marketing approaches for the announcement, and technical migration timelines. Throughout, I maintained my focus on business considerations, compartmentalizing the knowledge that these decisions would dramatically impact my personal life. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed to implement various aspects of the acquisition plan, Alex lingered behind. "You're sure about this timeline?" he asked quietly when we were alone. "Once we make the announcement, there's no going back. Your personal situation will be exposed." "I'm sure about the business decision," I replied. "The personal consequences are a separate matter." Alex had been with me since Phoenix's earliest days, leaving a prestigious position at Oracle to join my unproven startup. He'd earned the right to speak candidly. "Melissa, I've never questioned your judgment, but in this case, the business and personal are inextricably linked. Have you fully considered what happens after? Not just professionally, but in your home life?" Jennifer Winters had raised the same concern earlier that day. The aftermath, the day after the revelation, the personal earthquake that would follow the business transaction. "I've built Phoenix by separating my professional judgment from my personal circumstances," I said, gathering my notes from the table. "That's not changing now. The acquisition makes strategic sense regardless of my connection to Meridian." "I'm not questioning the acquisition," Alex clarified. "I'm concerned about you. 7 years of maintaining this dual identity, culminating in a revelation that simultaneously ends your husband's career. That's not just a business transaction, that's life-altering." His concern was genuine, and I appreciated it more than I could express. In a world where I constantly managed perceptions and controlled information, Alex's straightforward care was refreshing. "I'll handle it," I assured him, though with less certainty than I'd intended to convey. Alex nodded, respecting my boundaries even as his expression suggested continued concern. "If you need anything, professionally or personally, you know where to find me." After he left, I remained in the conference room, staring at the organizational chart still displayed on the table's surface. Derek's name highlighted among those slated for transition. In business terms, a necessary restructuring. In personal terms, a seismic shift in the foundation of our marriage. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully imagine the moment of revelation. Derek's face when he realized that his housewife was not only a successful CEO, but the very person eliminating his position. The shock, the disbelief, the inevitable anger. 7 years of carefully maintained fiction collapsing in an instant? Would there be anything left to salvage? Did I even want to try? The dynamic between Derek and me hadn't always been so imbalanced. In the early days of our relationship, when we both worked at Rivera Systems, he had at least superficially valued my technical expertise. But even then, there were warning signs I chose to ignore. At company functions, he would introduce me as the best programmer on my team, despite the fact that I outranked him in the organizational structure and led the development project he was assigned to support. In meetings, he would rephrase my technical explanations, claiming he was translating the technical jargon into business terms, though the executives we were briefing were perfectly capable of understanding my original explanations. When I received an industry award for the payment processing system I'd designed, Derek told colleagues I had helped implement his architectural vision, a blatant misrepresentation that I confronted him about privately. "It's just office politics, Mel," he had said dismissively. "Nobody cares who came up with which specific piece. We're a team, remember? My success is your success." But it never seemed to work in the other direction. My successes were minimized, absorbed into his narrative, or explained away as exceptions. The pattern intensified after we married, and I left Rivera to start Phoenix. Without the corporate structure to define our respective positions, Derek quickly established a new narrative, one where his career represented our shared professional achievement, while my role was to support and facilitate his success. It began subtly. He started referring to our home, though I had purchased the property and handled all maintenance. He discussed our finances, though we maintained entirely separate accounts. He talked about our social circle, though most of the people we socialized with were his colleagues and their partners. Within a year of our marriage, Derek had fully embraced the fiction that I was content to be defined by my relationship to him, a fiction I allowed to persist as I built Phoenix in secret. The more he underestimated me, the more freedom I had to operate beyond his awareness or interference. But the psychological cost of that freedom had been substantial. Maintaining a false persona, pretending to be less capable, less ambitious, less intelligent than I actually was, had taken a toll I hadn't fully acknowledged until recently. I left Phoenix's headquarters shortly after 5, transitioning back to my role as Derek's wife with the practiced ease of long habit. On the drive home, I called the caterer for the neighborhood holiday committee event. A real gathering, though one I participated in primarily to maintain my cover story rather than out of genuine interest. By the time Derek arrived home at 7, I had changed into the casual but elegant home attire he expected, prepared a dinner of his favorite foods, and was sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of wine, appearing to scroll through design websites on my tablet, actually reviewing acquisition documents behind a secure application. "Something smells amazing," Derek said as he entered, setting down his briefcase and loosening his tie. "Coq au vin," I replied, closing the secure app and rising to greet him. "How was your day?" "Challenging," he sighed, accepting the glass of bourbon I handed him. 2 fingers, 2 ice cubes exactly as he preferred. "The development team keeps pushing back on the feature timeline for the Q1 release. They claim the back-end infrastructure can't support the new modules without a complete overhaul." I kept my expression neutral, though I knew the development team was absolutely correct. Meridian's system architecture was fundamentally flawed, incapable of supporting the ambitious features Derek had promised the board and clients. "What does your technical lead suggest?" I asked, returning to the stove to check on dinner. Derek took a long sip of his bourbon. "Taylor thinks we should postpone the feature release and focus on infrastructure improvements first, but he doesn't understand the business pressures. We've already promised these capabilities to key clients. Garrison is expecting me to deliver." This was the crux of Derek's management philosophy, promising whatever would advance his position, regardless of technical feasibility, then pressuring his team to somehow make it work. It was also exactly why Meridian's division was failing and why Phoenix's acquisition would ultimately benefit their clients and most of their employees. "Couldn't you release a scaled-down version?" I suggested, playing my customary role of supportive but naive wife. "Something that demonstrates the concept without requiring the full infrastructure changes." Derek shook his head, setting down his glass to loosen his cuffs. "You don't understand the complexity, Mel. These enterprise systems can't just be patched together like some website. They require sophisticated architecture." The condescension in his tone was so familiar I barely registered it anymore. The fact that I had designed multiple enterprise-level systems far more sophisticated than anything Meridian had ever developed was, of course, information he didn't possess. "Of course," I murmured, serving our dinner. "Just trying to help." "No, honey. I appreciate the effort." He settled at the dining table as I poured him a glass of the expensive burgundy I'd opened for dinner. "That's what I love about coming home to you. No technical jargon, no impossible demands. Just understanding and support." The irony of his statement hung in the air between us, though only I could perceive it. His definition of understanding meant never challenging his perspective. His version of support required me to diminish myself to elevate him. "The holiday committee meeting went well," I said, changing the subject to one Derek found appropriately within my domain. "We've finalized the plans for the neighborhood gathering next weekend. You're so good at organizing these events," Derek remarked between bites of the carefully prepared meal. "Everyone at Meridian always comments on what a perfect hostess you are." Another subtle reinforcement of my assigned role, the social coordinator, the hostess, the woman whose greatest achievement was making others comfortable. "The Garrisons confirmed they'll attend," I added, offering information I knew would interest him. "Philip mentioned he's looking forward to discussing something with you outside the office environment." Derek immediately straightened, his attention captured. "Really? Did he give any hint about what?" "Something about strategy planning for the new year," I said vaguely. What Philip had actually told me, during a private conversation when Derek was occupied with other guests at a previous function, was his concern about the division's technical stability and his growing doubts about Derek's leadership. "This could be significant," Derek mused, already constructing a narrative where this conversation would lead to his promotion. "Garrison has been hinting about restructuring the executive team, with the Harrison project coming online and my division's feature set releasing in Q1. The timing would be perfect for me to step into a more senior role." I nodded encouragingly, knowing that no promotion was forthcoming. In fact, by the time the neighborhood gathering occurred, the acquisition would be just days away from announcement. Philip Garrison would be preparing for his own exit, and Derek's division would be on the verge of absorption into Phoenix. "You deserve recognition for all your hard work," I said, and meant it, though not in the way Derek interpreted. He had worked hard, if misguided, driving his team toward impossible goals while ignoring fundamental problems. "We deserve it," Derek corrected, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Your support has been crucial to my success. When I move up, we'll both benefit. Maybe we can finally renovate the kitchen like you've wanted." This was Derek's version of partnership. His achievements would eventually trickle down to benefit me inappropriately in domestic ways. A kitchen renovation. Perhaps new landscaping, the trappings of success rather than success itself. "That would be lovely," I replied, the practiced response of a woman who had supposedly invested her ambitions in her husband's career advancement. As dinner continued, Derek dominated the conversation with details of office politics, client interactions, and his strategic vision for Meridian's future, a future that would never materialize. I provided the expected responses: admiration for his insight, sympathy for his challenges, agreement with his assessments. This was the dynamic we had established and reinforced over 7 years of marriage. Derek spoke. I listened. He decided. I supported. He achieved. I appreciated. The perfect complementary relationship by his definition. One where his identity expanded while mine contracted to fill whatever space he allocated. "I'm thinking of inviting James and Monica Cooper to the neighborhood gathering," Derek said as we cleared the dinner plates. "James just joined Meridian's legal team, and Garrison seems impressed with him. Could be useful to establish a connection outside the office." I nodded agreeably. "I'll add them to the guest list." "Great. And wear that blue dress you got last. Spring. The one that makes you look sophisticated but not like you're trying too hard. First impressions matter." Even my appearance was subject to Derek's strategic considerations. The appropriate wife accessory for each business objective, carefully selected like the right tie or cufflinks. "Of course," I said, loading dishes into the dishwasher, a task Derek never participated in, considering it firmly within my domain of responsibilities. "I need to review some reports before tomorrow's executive meeting," he announced, already moving toward his study. "Don't wait up. It might be late at night." And with that, he disappeared into his private space, leaving me to complete the kitchen. Clean up. The moment the study door closed, I straightened, the compliant posture I maintained in Derek's presence falling away. I quickly finished the dishes, then retreated to my hobby room to check on Phoenix operations and continue acquisition preparations. In 9 days, this carefully choreographed false dynamic would implode spectacularly. The woman Derek dismissed as just a housewife would be revealed as a tech industry leader. The husband who saw himself as the provider and protector would find himself professionally vulnerable, his position eliminated by his wife's business. Decision. The revelation would shatter more than Derek's career. It would destroy the fundamental premise of our relationship, the carefully constructed fiction we had both participated in for different reasons. Derek because it satisfied his ego, me because it provided cover for my true ambitions. As I activated my secure workstation, I wondered, not for the first time, whether anything authentic remained beneath the layers of deception, whether, when the false dynamic was stripped away, there would be anything worth preserving between Derek and me. 9 days until the answer became unavoidable. 8 days before the acquisition announcement, I woke before dawn. Derek remained asleep, his breathing deep and regular, oblivious to the careful calculations running through my mind as I slipped out of bed. This early morning ritual had become essential to maintaining my dual existence. The quiet hours before Derek awakened gave me time to transition between identities, to prepare for the day's necessary deceptions, to center myself before putting on the mask of just a housewife once again. In the kitchen, I brewed coffee and opened my personal laptop, the one Derek occasionally glanced at but never really examined, believing it contained nothing more interesting than recipes, home decoration ideas, and correspondence with friends. If he had ever looked more closely, he would have discovered sophisticated encryption and security protocols far beyond what any typical personal device would require. But Derek never looked closely at anything related to me. His lack of curiosity about my activities had been both insulting and advantageous. A blind spot I had exploited to build Phoenix Digital right under his nose. My secure email contained an update from Marcus Washington, Phoenix's CFO, with the latest financial projections for the acquisition. The numbers were even more favorable than our initial estimates. Meridian's division, while struggling under its current leadership, possessed valuable client contracts and intellectual property that would integrate perfectly with Phoenix's infrastructure. The acquisition would accelerate our growth trajectory by at least 18 months. From a purely business perspective, the decision was unassailable. The fact that it would also eliminate Derek's position was an incidental consequence, not the driving motivation. I needed to remember that when the personal fallout began. I closed the financial projections and opened the secure messaging system that connected me with Diane Chen, Phoenix's CTO. Diane had been conducting a detailed technical audit of Meridian's systems, identifying which components could be salvaged and which needed complete replacement. "The architecture is exactly as compromised as we suspected," her message read. Critical security vulnerabilities in the authentication layer, database connections exposed to potential injection attacks, and middleware that can't scale beyond current usage levels. Whoever designed this prioritized speed of deployment over stability and security. That whoever was primarily Derek and the technical leadership team he had assembled, people chosen more for their willingness to execute his vision without question than for their technical expertise. Derek had consistently pushed for feature development over infrastructure improvement, focusing on what could be demonstrated to clients rather than what would actually serve them reliably. "Your assessment matches our initial findings," I responded. "How quickly can we migrate existing clients to our infrastructure post-acquisition?" "Days for critical systems, 90 days for full integration." "The client contracts don't contain any technical specifications that would prevent migration." This was excellent news. I had been concerned that Meridian might have contractual obligations that would force us to maintain their flawed systems longer than was practical or secure. "Proceed with the migration planning," I instructed. "I want a detailed timeline ready for the announcement." I closed the secure applications and cleared all traces of Phoenix-related activity from the laptop, just as I heard Derek stirring upstairs. By the time he entered the kitchen, I was scrolling through a legitimate neighborhood committee email about the upcoming holiday gathering, the perfect picture of a wife focused on social obligations rather than corporate strategy. "You're up early," Derek commented, heading straight for the coffee I had prepared. "Couldn't sleep," I replied truthfully. "Thinking about the holiday gathering? There's still so much to coordinate." Derek made a non-committal sound, his attention already on his phone, checking overnight emails from the office. "I'm meeting with the board this morning to review the Q1 projections. Don't expect me until late." The board meeting wouldn't go well for Derek. I knew from Phoenix's due diligence that Meridian's executives were increasingly concerned about the division's performance. The technical problems Diane had identified were beginning to impact client satisfaction, and the ambitious features Derek had promised for Q1 were behind schedule and over budget. "Good luck," I said, pouring him a travel mug of coffee exactly the way he liked it, a small gesture of normalcy in a situation rapidly approaching. Extraordinary. "I'll be at the community center most of the day, finalizing the event space." This was partially true. I would make a brief appearance at the community center to maintain my cover, but most of my day would be spent at Phoenix's headquarters, finalizing acquisition details and preparing for the public announcement. Derek accepted the travel mug, glancing at me briefly. "That blue sweater washes you out," he noted critically. "You should wear the green one for the committee meeting. Makes a better impression." With that parting commentary on my appearance, a habit that had begun early in our marriage and intensified over time, he gathered his briefcase and departed, leaving me standing in our kitchen, contemplating how 7 years of marriage had distilled into this hollow exchange of logistical information and unsolicited critiques. Once I confirmed Derek had truly left, I quickly changed into professional attire and gathered my secure devices. Within 30 minutes, I was driving toward Cambridge, taking a circuitous route to ensure I wasn't spotted by any of Derek's colleagues who might recognize me. Phoenix Digital had begun in the spare bedroom of a small apartment I rented under my maiden name, a precaution I had taken early on, sensing that Derek's need to control the narrative of our relationship might extend to any venture I initiated. The first 6 months had been isolating and challenging. After leaving Rivera Systems with the seed of an idea that would eventually become Phoenix's core technology, I found myself working alone, writing code for 14 hours a day, sustained by instant coffee and determination. The breakthrough came when I developed a prototype of our adaptive authentication system, a security architecture that could identify and respond to emerging threats in real time, fundamentally changing how enterprise systems protected sensitive data. I knew the technology was valuable, but bringing it to market required resources beyond what I could generate alone. That's when I approached Eleanor Mitchell, a tech industry veteran who had mentored me briefly during my time at Riviera. I invited her to coffee, ostensibly to catch up, but with the real intention of gauging her interest in a new security paradigm. "I've been hearing you left Rivera to focus on family," Eleanor remarked as we settled at a quiet table in a cafe far from any of Derek's usual haunts. "Surprising choice for someone with your technical gifts." "That's the official story," I admitted, testing the waters. The reality is somewhat different. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, intrigued. I suspected as much. You never struck me as someone who would willingly step away from technological innovation. Taking a calculated risk, I slid a tablet across the table. This is what I've been working on for the past 6 months. An adaptive authentication system that fundamentally rethinks how we approach enterprise security. Eleanor spent 20 minutes examining the prototype, asking increasingly specific technical questions that revealed her growing interest. Finally, she looked up, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to genuine excitement. This is remarkable, Melissa. Why? Are you showing it to me? Because I need a strategic advisor who understands both the technical and business implications. And because I'm operating under constraints that make traditional funding channels complicated. Eleanor's perceptive gaze told me she understood the subtext. Derek doesn't know. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. No, and I prefer to keep it that way. She nodded slowly, processing the implications. So you need to build this venture with absolute discretion. No publicity, no industry announcements, nothing that might filter back to your husband through professional networks. Exactly. That complicates things, Eleanor acknowledged. But don't make them impossible. Tell me what you're thinking. That conversation laid the foundation for Phoenix's unusual development strategy. Instead of pursuing traditional venture capital with its attendant publicity and networking, we assembled a small group of private investors who valued confidentiality and were willing to bet on the technology rather than the founder's public profile. Eleanor introduced me to Alex Rodriguez, who left Oracle to become Phoenix's first employee and eventual COO. His operational expertise complemented my technical vision, and he never questioned the unusual privacy requirements I established. It's your company, he said simply, when I explained the need for absolute discretion. Founders have all sorts of reasons for keeping low profiles. As long as the technology is solid and the business model makes sense, the rest is just details. With Eleanor's guidance and Alex's operational skills, Phoenix secured its first enterprise client 14 months after I left Rivera. We implemented the adaptive authentication system for a mid-sized financial services company, demonstrating the technology's effectiveness in a real-world environment without public announcements or industry publicity. Word spread organically through technical channels. Security professionals who encountered the system recognized its revolutionary approach and made discreet inquiries. Within 2 years, Phoenix had 20 enterprise clients, all bound by confidentiality agreements that protected not just the technology details but also the company's leadership structure. I hired Diane Chen as CTO when it became clear that I couldn't continue overseeing both business strategy and technical development. Diane had built security systems for several major banks and understood the enterprise environment intimately. Like Alex, she accepted my privacy requirements without pressing for explanations. Marcus Washington joined as CFO when our financial operations became too complex for part-time management. His background in both startups and established tech companies brought valuable perspective to our growth strategy. Throughout this period of rapid but controlled expansion, I maintained the appearance of a supportive corporate wife in my life. With Derek, I attended Meridian functions with practiced grace, listened to Derek's work stories with feigned naivete, and endured his increasingly dismissive characterizations of my capabilities. The psychological toll of this double life was significant. Each time Derek casually diminished me in conversation, each assumption he made about my limited understanding of technology, each patronizing explanation of basic concepts I had mastered years ago, these moments accumulated, creating a reservoir of resentment I tried to channel into Phoenix's growth rather than personal bitterness. The company became my refuge, a space where my intelligence was recognized and valued, where my decisions shaped tangible outcomes, where I existed as my authentic self rather than someone's supporting character. The legal team needs your input on the employee transition documents, Sarah Patel said, drawing me back to the present moment in Phoenix's headquarters, specifically regarding the severance packages for executive personnel. I focused on the document Sarah had placed before me, which detailed the terms for employees whose positions would be eliminated following the acquisition, including Derek's. These seem standard, I noted, reviewing the severance calculations based on length of service and position level. 3-month salary plus extended benefits is generous given the circumstances. It's actually above industry standard, Sarah confirmed. We wanted to ensure the transition is as smooth as possible, particularly given the media attention this acquisition is likely to receive. The media attention would be intensified by the revelation of my connection to Derek, a detail Sarah and most of the Phoenix team didn't yet know. Only Alex, Eleanor, and the board members had been briefed on this complication. Let's add career transition services, I decided. Professional placement assistance, resume development, interview, coaching. The comprehensive package. Sarah made a note, though her expression suggested curiosity about this additional generosity. That will add approximately $8,000 per executive to the transition costs. Do you want to extend this to all departing employees, or just the executive level? All departing employees, I confirmed. It's important that everyone affected by this transition feels supported, regardless of their position. The decision was sound from both ethical and practical perspectives. The additional cost was minimal compared to the acquisition's overall value, and the goodwill generated would facilitate smoother integration of the remaining personnel. If my personal connection to Derek influenced the decision at all, it was only enforcing me to be more rigorously fair, ensuring I wasn't either punitive or excessively generous due to our relationship. I'll update the documents and return them for final approval by the end of day, Sarah said, gathering the materials. After she left, Alex entered with the latest client communication strategy for the acquisition announcement. We've prepared personalized outreach for Meridian's top 20 clients, emphasizing continuity of service while highlighting the enhanced capabilities Phoenix will bring to their operations. Good, I approved, reviewing the communication templates. Let's also develop specific messaging for the clients who've reported dissatisfaction with Meridian's recent performance. This is an opportunity to directly address their concerns, Alex nodded, making notes. Speaking of performance issues, we've obtained the minutes from Meridian's board meeting this morning. He slid a tablet across the desk. Thought you'd want to see them. The confidential minutes had been secured through legitimate channels. One of Meridian's board members sat on a foundation with Eleanor Mitchell and had privately expressed concerns about the company's direction. Still, reading the board's assessment of Derek's presentation felt uncomfortably like spying on my husband. The minutes confirmed what we already knew. Derek's division was underperforming, his promised features were behind schedule, and the board was losing confidence in his leadership. Philip Garrison had defended Derek, but with notably less enthusiasm than in previous meetings. The most relevant information for Phoenix came in the final paragraph. The board authorized Mr. Garrison to explore strategic options for the hardware division, including potential sale to interested parties, with findings to be presented at the January meeting. Alex watched me process this information. This officially confirms they're looking to sell. Our timing couldn't be better. Or worse, I murmured, thinking of the personal implications. Melissa? Alex said gently, using the tone he reserved for our rare personal conversations. I've respected your privacy regarding the situation with your husband, but as your COO, I need to ask, are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this acquisition on the current timeline? Once we announce, there's no going back. Your connection to Derek will become public knowledge, and the professional consequences for him will be immediate. I appreciated Alex's concern, but the decision had already been made, had effectively been made years ago when Derek first began reshaping my identity to suit his narrative. The acquisition makes strategic and financial sense, I replied. Phoenix needs Meridian's client relationships and intellectual property to accelerate our growth trajectory. Meridian needs a buyer before their technical infrastructure collapses. Completely. The personal complications are unfortunate but shouldn't dictate business strategy. Alex studied me for a moment, clearly weighing whether to push further. And have you decided how you'll handle the personal aftermath? When will Derek discover the truth? It was the question I had been avoiding, the one Jennifer Winters had urged me to consider, the one that kept me awake at night as the announcement date approached. I'm still evaluating options, I admitted, but my primary focus needs to be ensuring this acquisition succeeds. The personal consequences are secondary. Alex nodded, respecting my boundaries while clearly maintaining his concerns. Just remember you have support here, whatever happens. The team is behind you completely. His loyalty was touching, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the authentic relationships I had built at Phoenix. Connections based on mutual respect, rather than prescribed roles or power imbalances. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of acquisition preparations. By late afternoon, I had approved the final press release, minus my connection to Derek, which would be addressed separately, reviewed the client communication strategy, and authorized the financial transfers required to complete the transaction. Everything was in place for the announcement, now just 8 days away. 8 days until Derek's perception of me would be irreversibly shattered. 8 days until the careful separation between my two lives collapsed entirely. As I prepared to leave Phoenix and transform back into Derek's wife for the evening, Eleanor Mitchell called. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said without preamble. "Have you considered telling Derek before the public announcement, giving him time to process the personal revelations separately from the professional consequences?" Jennifer Winters suggested the same thing, I admitted, gathering my belongings. But I don't see a practical way to do it. Derek wouldn't simply accept the truth and adjust his perspective. He would try to leverage the information somehow, either to enhance his position at Meridian or to influence Phoenix's acquisition strategy. Perhaps, Eleanor acknowledged, but surprising him with both revelations simultaneously guarantees a defensive reaction. It eliminates any possibility of a measured response. What would a measured response even look like in this situation? I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. I've deceived him for 7 years. I'm about to eliminate his position through a business acquisition he didn't see coming. There's no scenario where this ends without significant conflict. Eleanor was silent for a moment. Just be certain you're making this decision based on actual assessment of Derek's likely reaction, not as an unconscious punishment for years of diminishment. The observation struck uncomfortably close to home. Was I avoiding a private revelation before the announcement because I genuinely believed Derek would try to interfere, or because I wanted him to experience maximum disorientation when he discovered the truth? The line between strategic necessity and emotional retribution had become increasingly blurred as the acquisition approached. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "But the business decision stands regardless. Phoenix is acquiring Meridian's division, and Derek's position will be eliminated in the restructuring." "The business decision is sound," Eleanor agreed. "It's the human element I'm concerned about." After ending the call, I sat alone in my office, considering Eleanor's gentle warning. 7 years of maintaining a false persona had taken a psychological toll I was only beginning to recognize. The growing anticipation I felt about revealing my true identity to Derek contained elements of vindication that troubled me upon closer examination. I had built Phoenix to create innovative technology and control my own professional destiny, not to orchestrate an elaborate revenge against a husband who underestimated me. Yet as the moment of revelation approached, I couldn't deny the satisfaction I felt imagining Derek's shock when he discovered who I really was and what I was capable of. This satisfaction, however justified, threatened to cloud my judgment at a critical business juncture. Phoenix needed clear-headed leadership during the acquisition, not a CEO distracted by personal drama or subconscious vendettas. 8 days to the announcement. 8 days to ensure my personal feelings didn't compromise the business I had sacrificed so much to build. 8 days to prepare for the collision of my two carefully separated lives. And still, no clear answer to the question everyone kept asking. What happens afterward? 7 days before the acquisition announcement, I found myself standing in our walk-in closet, staring at the physical manifestation of my divided life. On one side hung the wardrobe of Melissa Sullivan, Derek's wife, carefully selected clothing that projected exactly the image he preferred. Tasteful, understated, appropriate for a corporate executive's spouse. Nothing too bold or distinctive. Nothing that would draw attention away from him. On the other side, hidden behind rarely worn formal gowns, hung the clothes I wore as Melissa Reeves, CEO of Phoenix Digital, power suits, structured dresses, and tailored separates that communicated authority and confidence? A professional wardrobe I never wore in Derek's presence, stored in our shared closet because he never bothered to look beyond the section containing what he expected to see. I selected the blue sweater Derek had criticized that morning, paired with casual slacks that aligned with my community committee cover story. The neighborhood holiday gathering was scheduled for tomorrow evening, and I genuinely needed to finalize arrangements at the community center, a task I would complete before heading to Phoenix headquarters for critical acquisition meetings. As I dressed, I heard Derek moving around downstairs. He had returned late from his board meeting the previous night, his mood dark and uncommunicative. The board minutes I'd seen explained why. His presentation had been poorly received, his projections questioned, his leadership subtly, but definitely, undermined. In previous years, I would have carefully managed his wounded ego, providing the unconditional support and admiration he craved. Today, knowing what I knew about the approaching acquisition and his imminent job loss, such emotional labor felt hollow, a performance I could no longer justify. I found Derek in the kitchen, aggressively pressing buttons on the espresso machine I had purchased but he had claimed as his domain. His irritation was palpable, radiating from his rigid posture and the tight set of his jaw. "Morning," I offered neutrally, moving to prepare my own breakfast. Derek grunted in acknowledgement, attention fixed on his coffee preparation. After a moment, he spoke without looking at me. "I need you to cancel any plans you have next Thursday. Garrison wants us to host a dinner for some potential partners. Next Thursday, 2 days after the Phoenix acquisition would be announced. 2 days after Derek would learn his division was being absorbed and his position eliminated. 2 days after he would discover his wife of 7 years was actually the CEO who had orchestrated the entire transaction." "I don't think that's going to work," I said carefully, pouring myself a glass of orange juice. Derek finally turned, his expression conveying surprise that I hadn't immediately acquiesced. "It's not optional, Melissa. These partners could salvage the entire hardware division. Garrison specifically requested we host it at our home." The irony was painful. Derek was seeking a business solution that wouldn't exist by Thursday. Meridian's board had already authorized exploring sale options. Philip Garrison had likely already been informed about Phoenix's interest, though the details remained confidential, until the formal announcement. "I have a prior commitment," I insisted, maintaining eye contact. This small act of resistance, saying no to Derek's demands, felt significant after years of calculated compliance. What commitment could possibly be more important than my division's future? Derek demanded, his tone carrying that familiar edge of dismissal. "Another garden committee meeting? A book club? This is my career, Melissa." The opening was perfect. A moment to reveal the truth, to end the deception before the public announcement. I could tell him now, in the privacy of our home, giving him time to process the personal revelation before facing the professional consequences. Instead, I found myself responding with practiced deflection. "I understand it's important. I'll see what I can reschedule. Derek's expression shifted from irritation to satisfaction, interpreting my response as capitulation rather than the holding pattern it actually was. Good. We'll need to impress these partners. The division is at a critical juncture. If only he knew how critical. By Thursday, the entire division would belong to Phoenix, and Derek's career at Meridian would be over. I'll handle everything, I assured him, the double meaning of my words lost on him completely. Derek glanced at his watch and grabbed his travel mug. I'm meeting with the development team all day. Don't expect me for dinner. After he left, I remained in the kitchen, contemplating the missed opportunity. I could have told him the truth. I could have ended the charade. Instead, I had fallen back into familiar patterns of avoidance and accommodation. Eleanor's warning echoed in my mind. Was I avoiding a private revelation because I genuinely believed Derek would interfere with the acquisition? Or because some part of me wanted to maximize the impact when he finally learned the truth? I pushed the uncomfortable question aside and focused on the day ahead. The community center first, to maintain my cover story. The Phoenix headquarters for critical acquisition preparations. 7 days until the announcement. 7 days to finalize everything while maintaining the increasingly fragile facade of my marriage. The Brookline Community Center hummed with pre-holiday activity as volunteers decorated the main hall for tomorrow's neighborhood gathering. I spent an hour confirming arrangements with the caterer, approving the final decoration scheme, and reviewing the event timeline with the volunteer coordinator. All legitimate tasks that reinforced my cover as a community-focused housewife. Throughout these conversations, I maintained the pleasant, slightly deferential persona I had cultivated as Derek's wife. I accepted suggestions I might have questioned in my Phoenix role, smiled through minor inefficiencies I would have addressed directly in a business context, and generally presented as someone whose highest aspiration was a successful neighborhood event. You're so good at organizing these gatherings, Melissa, said Barbara Whitfield, the volunteer coordinator who knew me only as Derek Sullivan's wife. I don't know what we'd do without you. It's nothing, I demurred, the practiced response of a woman conditioned to minimize her contributions. I'm happy to help. Still, it's impressive how you manage everything so seamlessly, Barbara continued. Derek must appreciate having such a capable wife handling all this while he focuses on his career. The comment was meant kindly, but it crystallized everything problematic about my situation. Even here, among neighbors who had no connection to Meridian Technologies, I was defined primarily by my relationship to Derek. My competence was framed as a supportive contribution to his success rather than an independent quality. Derek appreciates efficiency in all things, I replied, my tone revealing more edge than I intended. Barbara gave me a curious look, perhaps picking up on my uncharacteristic directness. Well, we certainly appreciate you. The holiday gathering wouldn't happen without your coordination. I thanked her sincerely, recognizing that Barbara meant well, then excused myself to make a phone call. In the community center's quiet courtyard, I checked my secure phone for updates from Phoenix. Alex had sent a message marked urgent. Senator Wilder's office called. They want to move the federal authentication contract presentation up to tomorrow. Can you make it work? The federal contract represented a major opportunity for Phoenix, a chance to implement our adaptive authentication system across multiple government agencies. We had been pursuing this opportunity for months, gradually building relationships with key decision-makers, including Senator Catherine Wilder, who chaired the committee overseeing governmental technology infrastructure. Tomorrow was the neighborhood holiday gathering, an event where my absence would be noticed and potentially questioned by Derek. But the federal contract presentation couldn't be delegated. As the system's original architect and Phoenix's CEO, I needed to address the technical and strategic questions that would inevitably arise. Confirm for tomorrow, I replied to Alex. I'll handle the scheduling conflict. I would need to manufacture an excuse for missing part of the neighborhood gathering. perhaps an emergency with the caterer or a last-minute issue with the event space. Derek would be irritated by my divided attention at a social function where he expected me to focus entirely on showcasing our perfect marriage. But he would accept a community service explanation more readily than the truth, that his wife was presenting a cutting-edge security system to federal officials while he networked with neighbors. With the community center tasks completed, I drove to Phoenix headquarters, taking my usual circuitous route to avoid detection. The security of my compartmentalized life, always precarious, felt increasingly fragile as the acquisition announcement approached. 7 more days of careful deception, 7 more days of divided attention and manufactured excuses. The weight of this double existence had grown nearly unbearable. The federal team will expect detailed explanations of how our authentication system addresses the specific vulnerabilities identified in last month's security audit, Diane explained as we prepared for the next day's presentation. They're particularly concerned about quantum computing threats and zero-day exploits. We sat in Phoenix's secure conference room, surrounded by technical documentation and prototype demonstrations of our adaptive security architecture. The system represented the culmination of years of development, a fundamentally new approach to enterprise security that could identify and neutralize emerging threats in real time. I've updated the technical documents to address those specific concerns, I said, reviewing the materials on my tablet. And I've prepared a demonstration that simulates an advanced persistent threat scenario using techniques similar to those identified in the audit. Diane nodded appreciatively. Perfect. The Senator's technical advisors will respond well to that level of specificity. She hesitated, then added, You seem distracted today. Is everything all right with the Meridian acquisition? The acquisition is proceeding as planned, I assured her. Just managing some personal scheduling conflicts. Diane accepted this explanation without pressing further. Another example of the professional boundaries and mutual respect that characterized my relationships at Phoenix. Unlike Derek, who demanded to know every detail of my activities while showing minimal interest in my actual thoughts or feelings, my colleagues respect my privacy while valuing my contributions. The contrast between these two worlds had never felt more stark. At Phoenix, I was Melissa Reeves, respected CEO, technical innovator, decisive leader. At home, I was Melissa Sullivan, supportive wife, social coordinator, just a housewife in Derek's dismissive phrasing. In 7 days, these separate identities would collapse into one contradictory whole, forcing a reckoning I had avoided for years. One more thing, Diane said as our meeting concluded. The technical migration team needs your input on the architecture mapping for Meridian's legacy systems. They've identified some unusual customizations that weren't documented in the materials we acquired. This was unsurprising. Derek's approach to system development had always prioritized speed over documentation, resulting in technical debt that would now become Phoenix's responsibility to address. Schedule a working session for Monday, I instructed. I want to examine those customizations personally before we finalize the migration approach. As Diane left, Alex entered with updated acquisition documents requiring my approval. The board unanimously supported the accelerated timeline, he reported. All financial mechanisms are in place for the January 12th announcement. Excellent, I acknowledged, signing the required authorizations. What about the personnel transition communications? Ready for your final review, Alex confirmed, opening a folder containing the carefully crafted messages that would inform Meridian employees about the acquisition and its implications for their positions, including the executive transition notices. I took the document containing Derek's termination details, scanning the professionally worded explanation of his position being eliminated due to organizational restructuring. The generous severance package, outplacement services, and extended benefits represented fair treatment by any industry standard. The document addressed him as Mr. Sullivan, a formal designation that created artificial distance between us, as if he were merely another Meridian executive affected by Phoenix's business decision. The severance calculations for all affected employees have been verified by finance and legal, Alex noted as I reviewed the documents. Everything is ready for distribution immediately following the announcement. I approved the final versions, my signature authorizing the process that would end Derek's career at Meridian. The business decision was sound, the execution professional and fair. Only the personal implications remained unresolved. There's one other matter, Alex said, his tone shifting slightly. In preparing the press materials for the announcement, our communications team raised a logical question we need to address. How do we handle the disclosure of your relationship to Derek Sullivan? This was the delicate issue we had deliberately left unaddressed until now. The business aspects of the acquisition had been meticulously planned, but the personal revelation that Phoenix's CEO was married to Meridian's soon-to-be-terminated VP required careful consideration. What options has the team proposed? I asked, though I had already considered multiple approaches to this inevitable disclosure. 3 scenarios, Alex explained. First, we proactively acknowledge the relationship in our initial announcement, framing it as an unfortunate personal complication in an otherwise straightforward business decision. Second, we wait for the media to discover the connection, which they inevitably will, and respond to inquiries as they arise. Third, we issue a separate personal statement from you after the acquisition announcement, addressing the relationship directly, but keeping it distinct from the business transaction. Each approach had merits and drawbacks. The proactive disclosure would control the narrative, but risked overshadowing the business rationale for the acquisition. Waiting for media discovery would maintain focus on the business deal, but could appear evasive once the connection emerged. A separate statement would distinguish personal from professional considerations, but might seem artificially compartmentalized. I need to consider this carefully, I said finally. Have the communications team prepare drafts for all 3 approaches, and I'll make a decision by Monday. Alex nodded, but his expression suggested he had more to say. Melissa, as your COO and friend, I have to ask, have you decided how you're going to handle this with Derek personally? Will you tell him before the public announcement? It was the question everyone seemed to be asking. Eleanor, Jennifer Winters, and now Alex. The question I continue to avoid answering definitively. I'm still evaluating the best approach, I replied, the non-answer revealing my ongoing uncertainty. The announcement is in 7 days, Alex reminded me gently. However you choose to handle it, that timeline is rapidly approaching. After he left, I remained alone in the conference room, surrounded by acquisition documents that would fundamentally alter both my professional trajectory and personal life. 7 days until the carefully constructed division between Melissa Reeves and Melissa Sullivan collapsed entirely. The mounting pressure of this approaching collision was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Each day required more elaborate deceptions, more careful compartmentalization, more emotional energy devoted to maintaining the fracturing facade. My secure phone buzzed with a message from Derek. Neighborhood gathering tomorrow. Wear something appropriate for meeting Garrison's potential partners. They'll be stopping by briefly. This needs to be perfect. Even now, with his division on the brink of acquisition and his position about to be eliminated, Derek's focus remained on appearances and impressions. The potential partners he hoped would salvage his division were likely already aware of the pending Phoenix acquisition. His efforts to impress them were futile, a fact he wouldn't discover for another 7 days. I should have felt triumph. At this evidence of Derek's misplaced confidence, this confirmation that his dismissive assessment of my capabilities had left him vulnerable to the very real business threat I represented. Instead, I felt a complicated mixture of vindication and regret, satisfaction that my professional achievements would finally be recognized, but sadness at the personal destruction that would accompany that recognition. 7 years of marriage, built on fundamental misunderstanding and deliberate deception. 7 days until that carefully constructed fiction imploded. The mounting tension between these realities had become almost unbearable. As I gathered my materials to leave Phoenix headquarters and transform back into Derek's wife for the evening, I made a decision. I would use the neighborhood gathering tomorrow to observe Derek one last time in his natural element, confident, controlling, casually dismissive of my capabilities. One final evening of playing the role he had assigned me before revealing the truth that would shatter his perception. Forever. 7 days. The countdown continued. The day of the acquisition announcement arrived with a crystalline January clarity. Boston had awakened to fresh snow that transformed the city into a pristine landscape of white-capped buildings and glistening streets. I stood at our bedroom window, watching the early morning light cast long blue shadows across the untouched snow in our backyard, feeling a strange sense of calm after weeks of mounting tension. Today, everything will change. The careful separation I had maintained between my two lives would collapse entirely. Derek would learn the truth, not just about Phoenix Digital and the acquisition of his division, but about who I really was and what I was capable of. The neighborhood holiday gathering 5 days earlier had provided the final catalyst I needed. Derek had been at his most dismissive, introducing me to Philip Garrison's potential partners as my wife who keeps everything running smoothly at home while I handle the real challenges at Meridian. He had interrupted me repeatedly, redirected conversations when I attempted to engage on business topics, and generally reinforced every aspect of the imbalanced dynamic we had established over 7 years of marriage. Watching him perform this familiar routine, confident in his superiority, secure in his assessment of my limited capabilities, I had made my decision. No private warning before the public announcement. No cushioning of the professional blow with a personal revelation. Derek would discover everything simultaneously, experiencing the full impact of the truth he had refused to see for 7 years. Now, on the morning of the announcement, I felt no triumph or anticipation, only resolve. The business decision was sound. Phoenix's acquisition of Meridian's division was strategically and financially justified. The personal consequences, while significant, were secondary to the business imperative. Or so I told myself as I prepared for the day. Derek had already left for Meridian, unaware that he was attending his final day of employment. He had mentioned a division-wide meeting scheduled for 10 a.m., a meeting where Philip Garrison would ostensibly discuss strategic realignment, but would actually announce the acquisition. Phoenix's representatives would be present to outline the transition plan, including the elimination of redundant leadership positions. I would not attend that meeting. Instead, I would be at Phoenix headquarters, managing our side of the announcement and preparing for the inevitable media response once my connection to Derek became public. We had decided on the third communication option, a separate personal statement addressing the relationship, to be released shortly after the initial acquisition announcement. As I dressed in one of my CEO outfits, a navy power suit I had never worn in Derek's presence, I rehearsed what I would say when we finally spoke. The explanation I would offer for 7 years of secrecy. The justification for not warning him before the public announcement. The path forward, if any existed, for our relationship. No matter how I phrased it, the truth remained stark. I had built an entire company in secret while allowing my husband to believe I was just a housewife. I had orchestrated the acquisition of his division while maintaining the fiction of a supportive spouse. I had deliberately kept him ignorant of my professional identity until the moment when that revelation would coincide with his job loss. TUI. Facts, laid out so plainly, made me question my own motivations in a way I had avoided during the acquisition planning. Had this been solely a business decision, or had I subconsciously engineered a spectacular revenge for years of dismissal and diminishment? This uncomfortable question followed me as I drove to Phoenix headquarters, taking my usual indirect route, Out of habit, though secrecy would soon be irrelevant. By noon, everyone at Meridian, including Derek, would know exactly who Melissa Reeves was and her connection to Melissa Sullivan. Phoenix's offices hummed with controlled excitement when I arrived. The acquisition represented a significant milestone for the company, an expansion that would accelerate our growth trajectory and solidify our position as an industry leader in adaptive security solutions. For most of the team, today was purely a business triumph, unmarred by the personal complications I faced. Everything's in place, Alex reported as I entered the executive suite. The announcement will go out at exactly 10:15, 5 minutes after Garrison begins the meeting at Meridian. Our representatives will enter at 10:20 to outline the transition plan. I nodded, reviewing the final press materials and transition documents. And the personal statement? Ready for your approval, Alex confirmed, handing me the carefully crafted explanation of my relationship to Derek and the measures we had taken to ensure business decisions remained objective despite this connection. The statement read like a case study in professional ethics, factual, transparent, slightly defensive in its emphasis on the strict firewall between personal relationship and business judgment. It made no mention of Derek's dismissive behavior or my deliberate secrecy. It offered no glimpse into the psychological reality of our marriage or the complicated emotions driving my decisions. It's approved, I said, returning the document. Schedule its release for 11 a.m. after the initial announcement has been distributed and the Meridian meeting is underway. Alex hesitated, studying my face. Are you sure you don't want to call Derek? There's still time to give him some warning. Before the public announcement. The suggestion held genuine concern. Alex had been skeptical of my decision to withhold the truth from Derek until the last possible moment, arguing that the personal and professional revelations should be separated for both ethical and practical reasons. He's about to find out. Anyway, I replied, glancing at my watch. It was 9:45 a.m. In 30 minutes, Derek's professional world would implode, and his understanding of his marriage would shatter simultaneously. That's precisely the point, Alex countered gently. Finding out from his wife directly would be difficult enough. Finding out from Philip Garrison in front of his entire division, with our representatives standing by to outline his termination package, that's a different level of public humiliation. Put so bluntly, the scenario sounded unnecessarily cruel. A staged revelation designed to maximize Derek's discomfort rather than a straightforward business transaction. Had that been my unconscious intent all along? Before I could respond, my secure phone vibrated with an incoming call from a number I recognized immediately. Meridian Technologies' main line. Derek was calling from his office. I need to take this, I said to Alex, moving toward my private office. Hold the announcement release until I confirm. Closing my door, I answered with professional neutrality. This is Melissa Reeves. No. Derek's voice came through, tight with barely controlled fury. This is Derek Sullivan calling his wife, who apparently has a different last name and a completely different life I knew nothing about. My heart rate accelerated. Somehow, Derek had discovered the truth before the official announcement. Derek, I can explain, he interrupted, his voice rising. Explain how my wife has been secretly running a technology company for years while pretending to be focused on community committees? Explain how said company is about to acquire my division and eliminate my position? Please, Melissa, explain how any of this makes sense. How did you find out? I asked, bypassing his questions temporarily. The announcement wasn't scheduled for another 20 minutes. Something had disrupted our carefully orchestrated timeline. Jennifer Winters, Derek, replied bitterly. Apparently, she thought I deserved a warning before being publicly humiliated. She called me 15 minutes ago, suggested I research Phoenix Digital's leadership, and specifically mentioned looking up Melissa Reeves. Jennifer had taken matters into her own hands, deciding Derek deserved advance notice despite my decision to the contrary. I wasn't sure whether to feel betrayed by her interference or grateful for her intervention. "I'm coming over," I said decisively. "We should discuss this in person." "Discuss what?" Derek demanded. "The fact that my wife has been living a double life for our entire marriage? The fact that while I thought you were planning charity events, you were actually building a company that would eventually destroy my career? What exactly is there to discuss?" His anger was justified. The revelation must have been shattering, discovering not only that his wife had deceived him for years, but that she was capable of achievements he had repeatedly dismissed as beyond her abilities. "All of it," I replied simply. "Everything you just said. It's complicated, Derek." He gave a harsh laugh. "Complicated?" "Yes, I imagine orchestrating this level of deception requires considerable complexity." There was a pause. Then his voice changed, becoming more controlled but no less intense. "I'll be in my office until they escort me out. You have 30 minutes. The line went dead. I stood motionless for a moment, absorbing the altered circumstances. The controlled revelation I had planned, Derek learning the truth in a structured business meeting, followed by my carefully prepared statement, had been preempted by Jennifer's intervention and Derek's rapid research. Now I faced a direct confrontation. On his territory, without the buffer of professional representatives or prepared statements, just Melissa and Derek, finally facing the truth that had simmered beneath our marriage for 7 years. I relayed the situation to Alex, instructing him to hold the announcements until I confirmed from Meridian. Then I left Phoenix headquarters for what would be my final covert journey, the last time I would need to hide my connection between Melissa Reeves, CEO, and Melissa Sullivan, wife. Derek's office occupied a corner of Meridian's executive floor, with views of Boston Harbor that reflected his senior status within the company hierarchy. As I approached, I could see him through the glass walls, standing at the window with his back to the door, tension evident in his rigid posture. His assistant, Claire, looked up in surprise as I approached. She knew me only as Derek's wife, the woman who occasionally called to adjust dinner reservations or confirm his attendance at social events. "Mrs. Sullivan," she greeted me with uncertainty. "I didn't know you were expecting—" "I'm not," I confirmed, "but Mr. Sullivan is expecting me." Before she could respond, Derek turned and saw me through the glass. Our eyes met across the distance, and I recognized the expression on his face. Not just anger, but profound disorientation. The man who thought he knew everything worth knowing about his wife was confronting the reality that he had fundamentally misunderstood her for their entire relationship. He nodded curtly, and I entered his office, closing the door behind me. For a moment, we simply regarded each other. I saw Derek taking in my professional attire, the power suit I never wore at home, the confident posture I had carefully subdued in his presence, the direct gaze I had learned to soften when playing the role of supportive wife. "You look different," he said finally. But then, I apparently never knew who I was looking at. "You saw what you expected to see," I replied, remaining by the door rather than approaching his desk. "A woman who matched your preconceptions." "Don't put this on me," Derek snapped, his controlled facade cracking. "You deliberately deceived me for years. You maintained an elaborate fiction while building a company specifically designed to target my division." "Phoenix wasn't built to target Meridian," I corrected, keeping my voice even. "The acquisition is a recent strategic decision based on business fundamentals. Your division has valuable IP and client relationships, but deteriorating technical infrastructure. Phoenix can stabilize the technology and leverage the client base. It's a sound business decision." Derek stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "Listen to yourself. You sound like a CEO," I supplied. "A business leader making strategic decisions based on market opportunities?" "Like someone I don't know at all," he finished, his voice hollow. 7 years of marriage, and you've been someone else entirely the whole time. The accusation struck deeper than I had anticipated. Despite the justified anger in his tone, I recognized the genuine hurt beneath it. Whatever else Derek had been, dismissive, controlling, condescending, he had believed in the version of our marriage he had constructed. Finding that reality completely upended had clearly shaken him to his core. "I tried to show you who I was in the beginning," I said quietly. "When we first married, I talked about my technical interests, my business, ideas, and my professional ambitions. You consistently redirected those conversations, reframed my capabilities, and gradually constructed a narrative where I was happier and more fulfilled, focusing on domestic matters while you pursued a real career." "That's not," Derek began, then stopped, perhaps remembering specific conversations that matched my description. "I never forced you into any role. You chose to focus on our home, on community activities. Did I choose that, Derek? Or did you simply decide it was appropriate and proceed as if we had reached that agreement together? How many times did you introduce me as just my wife, or explain that I used to work in tech but was happier now managing our home?" Derek's expression shifted as memories resurfaced, moments where he had indeed made exactly these pronouncements without consultation or confirmation. "Even if that's true," he said, his voice lower but no less intense, "it doesn't justify years of deliberate deception. Building an entire company in secret, using information from our personal relationship to inform business decisions that directly impact my career. Phoenix's interest in Meridian's division is based entirely on market analysis and strategic fit," I insisted. "The acquisition would make sense regardless of our personal connection." "Then why the secrecy?" Derek demanded, advancing from the window to stand behind his desk. "If this was purely a business decision, why maintain this elaborate charade until the last possible moment? Why not tell me you were running Phoenix months ago, separate from any acquisition discussions?" It was the central question, the one Eleanor, Jennifer, and Alex had all raised, the one I had avoided answering directly even to myself. Why had I maintained the deception for so long? "Because I knew how you would react," I said finally. "Not with support or pride in my accomplishments, but with attempts to control the narrative, to insert yourself into Phoenix's operations, to somehow position yourself as the strategic thinker behind my technical execution, just as you did at Rivera. Systems." Derek flinched, another memory clearly striking home. "That's unfair. We were a team at Rivera. A team where you consistently took credit for my innovations and presented yourself as the visionary while characterizing me as a skilled technician executing your ideas," I countered. "A dynamic you carried into our marriage, gradually expanding, until every aspect of our relationship reflected the same imbalance." For the first time, Derek seemed to consider this perspective seriously, his expression shifting from defensive anger to reluctant reflection. "Even if there's some truth to that," he conceded, "it doesn't justify the scale of your deception or the fact that you've orchestrated a business transaction that eliminates my position without any warning." "The position elimination is a business necessity," I explained. "Phoenix has its own product development leadership. Your role would be redundant in the integrated organization. The decision would be the same regardless of our relationship." "But the timing wasn't coincidental," Derek observed shrewdly. "You accelerated the acquisition announcement after the holiday party, after I introduced you as just a housewife to the potential partners." I couldn't deny this connection. The holiday party had indeed been the catalyst that finalized my decision to proceed with the acquisition on the accelerated timeline. That was the final confirmation that nothing had changed, I acknowledged. 7 years into our marriage, you still saw me primarily as an accessory to your success, someone who knew her place and made your life run smoothly while you handled real challenges. Derek was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. Outside his office, I noticed increased activity, executives moving with purpose, staff members gathering in small groups. The official announcement must have been released despite my instructions to Alex to wait for confirmation. So what happens now? Derek asked finally, gesturing toward the activity beyond his glass walls. Phoenix acquired my division. I lost my job, and we— What? Go home and pretend none of this happened? Try to rebuild a marriage founded entirely on misconceptions and deliberate deception? It was the question I had avoided throughout the acquisition planning. The aftermath, the personal consequences that would follow the professional transaction. Jennifer Winters had urged me to consider it. Eleanor Mitchell had warned me to prepare for it. Alex had tried to mitigate it. Now, facing Derek across his soon-to-be former office, I could no longer evade the central question. I don't know, I admitted honestly. I'm not sure there's anything left to rebuild. The marriage you thought. We had never actually existed. It was a fiction you created, and I allowed it to persist. And whose fault is that? Derek demanded, anger flaring again. You could have corrected my misconceptions at any time. Instead, you built an elaborate secret life and used it to orchestrate my professional downfall. Your professional situation is the result of Meridian's failing technical infrastructure and misaligned leadership priorities, I countered. The division would be facing acquisition or dissolution regardless of Phoenix's interest or my involvement. The business fundamentals made this outcome inevitable. Before Derek could respond, his office door opened without a knock. Philip Garrison entered, his expression grave but composed. Derek, Mrs. He paused, clearly uncertain which name to use. Ms. Reeves, I see you've already discussed the situation. Jennifer Winters provided advance notice, Derek explained tightly. Philip nodded, then addressed me directly. Your representatives are in the main conference room. The division announcement is scheduled to begin in 5 minutes. Will you be joining us? The question placed me at a crossroads. I could attend the announcement as Melissa Reeves, CEO of Phoenix Digital, publicly claiming my professional identity in front of Derek's soon-to-be former colleagues. Or I could step back, allowing Phoenix's representatives to handle the business aspects while I focused on the personal fallout with Derek. Phoenix's team will handle the announcement, I decided. Derek and I have personal matters to discuss. Philip nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. Of course, I'll inform them. He hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, the board believes this acquisition represents the best outcome for Meridian's shareholders and most of our employees. The division's technical challenges had become unsustainable. With that diplomatic assessment of the situation Derek had repeatedly minimized, Philip withdrew, leaving us alone again. Derek stood motionless behind his desk, the reality of his position finally sinking in. In minutes, his team would learn not only that their division had been acquired, but that the acquiring company was led by Derek's own wife, a woman they had met at company functions and been led to believe was just a housewife. You should go, he said finally, his voice flat. Your representatives are waiting. Derek. No, he interrupted, raising a hand. There's nothing more to say right now. You've made your business decision. You've revealed your secret identity. You've explained your justifications. Now I need time to process all of this before we discuss what, if anything, remains of our marriage. His request was reasonable. The shock of these revelations, both professional and personal, required time for integration and assessment. Pushing for immediate resolution would only entrench defensive positions and prevent thoughtful evaluation. I understand, I said, moving toward the door. I'll be at Phoenix headquarters when you're ready to talk. Derek looked up sharply. Not at home? I think separate spaces would be beneficial for now, I replied carefully. I've arranged accommodations near the office. In truth, I had secured an apartment weeks ago, anticipating the need for physical separation following the announcement. Another secret preparation Derek would likely interpret as evidence of premeditated deception rather than practical foresight. As I reached the door, Derek spoke again. One last question, Melissa. Was any of it real? Or was our entire marriage just an elaborate cover for your professional ambitions? The question cut to the heart of our situation. The fundamental uncertainty about whether authentic connection had ever existed beneath the layers of misunderstanding and deception. The feelings were real, I answered after careful consideration. At least in the beginning. But the foundation was flawed from the start. You wanted a wife who matched your preconceptions, and I wanted professional independence without having to fight your assumptions every day. We both participated in constructing a marriage based on incomplete truths. Derek absorbed this, his expression unreadable. I'll contact you when I'm ready to discuss next steps. With that final, businesslike statement, he turned away, effectively, dismissing me from his office and perhaps from his life. I exited quietly, passing through the increasingly agitated Meridian employees without acknowledgement. No one recognized me as anything other than Derek Sullivan's wife, a perception that would dramatically change within the hour as the acquisition details became public knowledge. Outside Meridian's building, I paused to check my secure phone. Multiple messages had accumulated during my conversation with Derek. From Alex. Announcement released per accelerated schedule due to information leak. Media response immediate and extensive. Personal statement scheduled for 11 a.m. From Eleanor. Saw the announcement. Call me when you can. Concerned about personal implications. From Jennifer Winters. I made the decision Derek deserved warning. Hope you understand. Available if you need to talk. The carefully orchestrated revelation had unraveled, accelerated by Jennifer's intervention, and the subsequent information leak. The professional transaction would proceed according to the established business plan, but the personal aftermath had veered into uncharted territory. As I drove toward Phoenix headquarters, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 7 years ago, I had allowed Derek's misconceptions about my capabilities to go unchallenged, creating space to build something he couldn't appropriate or control. That strategic decision had evolved into an elaborate deception that eventually undermined the very relationship it was initially designed to protect. The business outcome remained sound. Phoenix's acquisition of Meridian's division would benefit our company, their clients, and most of their employees. The personal cost, however, was only beginning to emerge. A marriage irreparably damaged by fundamental misunderstanding and deliberate concealment. Derek had called me just a housewife, never suspecting I would soon make him jobless. The irony of that dismissive characterization was now complete, but the satisfaction I had anticipated feeling at this moment was absent. Instead, I experienced a complex mixture of professional accomplishment and personal regret. Pride in Phoenix's achievement tempered by recognition of the human consequences. As I pulled into the reserved parking space marked CEO at Phoenix headquarters, I allowed myself to fully integrate the two identities I had kept separated for 7 years. No more compartmentalization, no more careful deceptions, no more diminishing my capabilities to maintain someone else's comfortable narrative. Whatever happened with Derek, reconciliation, separation, or some negotiated middle ground, I would move forward as my complete, authentic self. The woman who could orchestrate a complex business acquisition and manage a household budget. The leader who could design innovative security architecture and organize a neighborhood gathering. The person who contained multitudes that could never be reduced to just anything. The revelation was complete. The aftermath was just beginning. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.